Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of the Gospel of Matthew today. We're in Matthew chapter 11. We're going to try to get to read verses 11, Matthew chapter 27. I'm going to read verses 11 through 23. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "You said it." And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he made no other answer. And Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he did not answer him with regard even to a single charge, so that the governor was quite amazed. Now at the feast the governor was accustomed to release for the multitude one prisoner whom they wanted. And they were holding at the time a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. And when they were gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew because of envy they had delivered him up. And while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man. Last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. And when the governor answered and said to him, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They said to him, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." And when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water, washed his hands in front of the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself." And the people answered and said, "His blood be on us and our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but Jesus he scourged and delivered over to be crucified. There's so much happening here, and I do want to mention that yesterday when we were talking about, last time I should say, when we were together and we were talking about purchasing the field of the potter's field, there's an irony of history that is a bittersweet irony that's involved with the purchasing of this field. The blood money for Jesus was used to purchase the potter's field. It's probably called a potter's field because it was a source of clay that was good for making pottery. And so they bought this field and they used it to bury strangers in. Up to that point, people who died and had no burial place and no one to claim the body were just thrown over into the ravine of Hinnom, which was the valley that served as the garbage heap of the town. It's where they threw all their garbage, and it was usually smoldering and on fire. The valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, is the New Testament word for hell, by the way. And so the blood money of Jesus, in kind of a literal sense, provided a place for people to go so they were not thrown into the pit of hell, the valley of Hinnom. It's not anything theologically significant about that, really. I mean, the Bible never makes that point, but historically there's a sweet and a bittersweet irony about that happening. Okay, let's talk about Jesus before Pilate. We may have to take 2 sessions to cover this. Jesus before Pilate, we've already talked at length about the difficulties between Caiaphas and Pilate, and those difficulties will eventually lead to Pilate's own forced suicide as he loses his legal case in Rome and is convicted of violating the rights of the Jewish people in their homeland. But I think we see a man in Pilate that we can respect a bit, to a certain extent. He's a man who recognizes Jesus' innocence and who, insofar as he can, without great cost to himself politically, try to free Jesus, and who makes more than one attempt to free Jesus, which we know from the other gospel writers. There is the presenting of Jesus after he's been scourged and saying, "Behold the man," hoping that this will do the trick and he can release Jesus. Why would he even want to release Jesus? Well, we're told in Matthew's gospel and nowhere else that he's been warned by his wife. And people in the ancient world took dreams quite seriously. And Pilate's wife would have been there with him. It had been just recently, in the last few years, that Roman governors were allowed to take their wives with them to the frontier. And they were at this time. And his wife is there with him. So that's one reason. But another reason is the whole due process of it. That he seems to be a man who wants to not execute someone who is innocent of any wrongdoing, even if he is a Jew. And it seems to me that Pilate is making some attempt at being good government, at observing due process. But we've run out of our time today. We have more to talk about this passage. We'll do a part 2 of these verses next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes.